So, continuing on here, one of the key documents that is on our College Board list of documents that we must know, foundational documents, is the United States Constitution. It would be silly for me to try to put on a single flashcard everything you need to know about the United States Constitution. Of course, it's integral to every unit we study. So just understand and be aware of the fact that in a document-based question, they might ask you to bring examples in from the Constitution itself. And the core ideas in the Constitution, obviously checks and balances, and separation of powers, and the main compromises that were made when it comes to representation and the Great Compromise at the Constitutional Convention. So there's a lot of other flashcards and other topics in our other units on the Constitution itself, and you need to know all the provisions we've talked about. So I'm not going to make a separate flashcard about the Constitution itself. That would just be a silly endeavor. So just make sure you know all the things we've talked about related to the Constitution all the way throughout the course. I will, however, dovetail that comment with the Federalist 51 document, which directly relates to the core ideas in the Constitution. So the Federalist 51, again, a Federalist paper arguing for the ratification of the Constitution. It argues and really explains the philosophy behind the two key constitutional concepts, separation of powers and checks and balances. So it's a really, really important document because of all the concepts in the Constitution, these are at the core some of the most significant. Of course, separation of powers is the idea that you have three distinct branches that have different jobs. The legislative branch creates laws, the executive branch enforces the law, and the judicial branch interprets the law. Related to this concept is checks and balances. The idea that each branch can limit the other branches through some of their designated powers, be it through a presidential veto of legislation, be it through a congressional impeachment of a judge or a president, be it through a judicial pardon or judicial interpretation of a law. So these, a judicial interpretation of a law and a presidential pardon of a crime, conviction of a crime. So these are at the core of our political system. And I just thought it would be useful to put here some of the key quotes from Federalist 51. So one of the quotes says, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place oblige it to control itself." The key idea here being human beings are flawed. And so whoever we have in power in a political system, they will have flaws, they will be imperfect, and you always run a risk in any government of a government becoming tyrannical, of overreaching. This is one of the concerns the Anti-Federalists had. This is a fear that Madison is trying to put to rest here, saying if parts of the government are in the hands of bad people who want to do bad things, then the other governmental components will be able to control it, right? The government must control the people, but then be able to control itself. And this is this next quote here. "Ambition must be made to counteract ambition." You hear politicians say this all the time when they're debating, when Congress is getting upset about something the president is doing. You'll hear congressmen and women use this quote and say we must be able to limit the powers of the other branches. And that's at the core of our political system. Sometimes it functions well, sometimes it doesn't, and that's something we talk about throughout the whole course. We certainly aren't here saying, look how perfect the system is, but this is something that is philosophically at the bedrock of the American political system, and Madison discusses it in Federalist 51. We talk about it in our first unit. I just noticed here, Federalist 70, it says. It should say 51. But when it says, how are concepts of Federalist 51 embedded in the Constitution, you want to give examples of checks and balances. You want to be able to give examples of the different powers that each of the three branches have. They're embedded all over the place. They're woven into the fabric of the document. So the Constitution, Federalist 51, documents we need to know.